wide, a palace carved into the throat of a mountain. 3 moons hang low over spires of black crystal. The great hall glows from within like a lantern hollowed out of the world. Closer, 300 nobles fill the tiered seats, pale blue faces, silver scales, robes the color of frost. They do not speak, they do not move, they watch the center of the floor the way people watch weather about to break. Closer still, a man kneels on polished crystal, a human, alone, his flight suit stiff with 3 months of salt and silence, his hands bound behind him. Blood traces a thin, slow line down his throat where an obsidian blade has been pressed for a very long time. He does not flinch. He does not kneel because he is afraid. He kneels because they made him. His eyes lift. They find the empty throne, and somewhere above the hall, a queen has already made a decision. No one in this room will survive. Part 1. The lights went out. Every system in the palace died at once. 300 nobles screamed in the dark. Their voices rose and cracked and scattered across a hall the size of a cathedral. A man in chains stood perfectly still at the center of it. He did not scream. He counted. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. I had built the backup himself, piece by piece, in the quiet hours when nobody watched, because that was what engineers did. They fixed things, even things that were never meant to be fixed. The 4th second came, and the lights came back, but that was months away. That was the end of a story that had not yet begun. That was the moment everything he had suffered would finally mean something. Right now, on the morning that would change everything, he was still on his knees, and a blade was pressed to his throat, and he did not know a single thing about what was coming. His name was Callum Whitfield. He was 42 years old, and he had already died more times than he could count. The blade at his throat was made of obsidian honed by hand older than any human civilization. It rested against his jugular with the precision of a surgeon and the patience of an executioner. A thin bead of blood traveled down the curve of his neck, slow, warm. It soaked into the collar of a flight suit that had not been washed in 3 months. He did not flinch. I was too tired to flinch. 300 nobles of the Solvarian Empire watched him from tiered seats of carved black stone. Their faces were pale blue, or silver, or the color of frost forming on glass. They watched him the way people watched an animal about to be slaughtered, not with cruelty, with disinterest, because the animal was already meat, and they had already moved past the sight of it. The great hall was carved from a single mountain. Crystal columns climbed toward the vaulted ceiling. Each one hummed at a frequency just below hearing, a sound that lived in the bones, that made the teeth ache, that whispered to something older than language. And still Callum did not kneel. The High Commander held the blade. His name was Calor Vex. His scales were the color of tarnished silver. His eyes were pale gold and did not blink often enough for a face to be comfortable. He leaned close, close enough that Callum could smell the metallic tang of him, close enough that the blade drew a second bead of blood. "You dare petition for sanctuary," Calor said. His voice was quiet, almost bored, "when your species cannot even hold a single colony world." Callum did not answer at first. I was looking at the throne. It sat at the far end of the hall, enormous, carved from a single block of black crystal, empty. It looked less like a chair and more like a monument to something that had already ended. "With respect," Callum said, and his voice came out steadier than he expected. We held New Meridian for 6 years against the Crimson Vanguard. We only lost it because no one answered our distress calls. The hall went still. A ripple passed through the nobles. Scales darkened. Heads turned. Somewhere in the third tier, a woman inhaled sharply and did not exhale because he had done it. He had said the thing you were not supposed to say. He had reminded 300 aristocrats of a political failure that belonged in part to them. The Solvarians had received those distress calls. They had debated them. They had scheduled meetings about them. And by the time they sent a single patrol, New Meridian was ash. Kaylor's grip tightened on the hilt. "Insolence," he hissed. "Truth," Callum said. The blade bit deeper. More blood ran. It pooled at his collar. It soaked into fabric that was already stiff with 3 months of salt and sweat and things he did not want to name. He did not move. He did not shift his weight. He kept his eyes forward because he had already lost everything, because he had watched his wife burn with the colony, because his daughter had been 8 years old and she had not made it to the transport and he had not been there when it mattered, because death did not scare him anymore. Nothing did. I had made peace with that fact somewhere around the 2nd month in the escape pod, when the water recycler started producing liquid that tasted less like copper and more like rust, when the photograph of Clara and Ren taped above the console began to curl at the edges from the humidity of his own breath. He had made peace with dying the way you made peace with weather, not by choosing it, by recognizing it was simply the condition of the room. I was a man for whom the worst had already happened, and the worst had not killed him, and he was not sure whether that made him strong or simply unfinished. Enough. The voice cut through the hall like winter wind across a frozen lake. Every Solvarian in the chamber dropped to one knee. Instantly, a cascade of bowing bodies that rippled outward from the throne like a stone thrown into still water. 300 nobles, down, silent. Kaylor Vex went with them. His blade pulled away from Callum's throat. His body folded to the floor with practiced obedience. He prostrated himself against the polished crystal, and his forehead touched the ground, and he did not raise it. Callum remained standing. He did not know the protocol. And frankly, after 3 months in a pod and 6 years of siege before that, he was too exhausted to care. His legs were unsteady. His vision had been swimming since they dragged him in from the salvage bay. The ringing in his ears from months of failing environmental systems had not fully faded and probably never would. But he stood, because standing was the one thing he had left, and he was not ready to give it up. She came from a side passage he had not noticed. Queen Seraphine Aloin. She moved like something between a dancer and a predator, each step deliberate, each motion carrying an authority that did not need to announce itself. The nobles stayed on their knees as she passed. Not one of them raised their head. Not one met her eyes. Her hair was platinum, not blonde, not silver. Platinum the way starlight would look if you could touch it. It fell loose down her back in a way that seemed almost accidental, as though whoever styled her had given up trying to make her look like anything other than herself. Her skin was porcelain white, not pale in a sickly way, pale in the way of something carved, something that had been made and then left in a quiet room for a very long time. Faint patterns moved beneath the surface, like frost forming and unforming across a window, like breath on cold glass. Her eyes were silver violet. Callum had never seen a color like that. They found him, and they held. She was tall, nearly 7 feet. Her ceremonial robes trailed behind her, in dark folds embroidered with symbols he could not read. She stopped 3 paces from him. She studied him the way a scientist studied a specimen, the way an engineer studied a machine that had failed in an unexpected way. "You are bleeding on my floor, human." Her voice was low, even. There was no cruelty in it. There was no warmth either. "Apologies, Your Majesty," Callum said. "I did not bring the blade." Something flickered across her face, surprise perhaps, or irritation at the fact that surprise was still possible after so many years. The nobles held their breath, 300 beings frozen in collective anxiety, waiting to see how their queen would respond to a creature that did not know enough to kneel. "You do not kneel," she said. "I do not know how your people kneel," Callum answered. "I would rather stand and show respect than kneel and show ignorance." Silence. It was not comfortable. It was not uncomfortable either. It was something else. A weighing, an assessment, as though she were measuring something inside him that had no name and no unit. Callum held her gaze because he had nothing to lose by holding it, and something in the way she looked at him suggested she was accustomed to people looking away first, that she had grown used to the averted eyes, the careful distances, the whole architecture of a court that had learned to orbit her without ever coming close. Then she turned to Kaelor, still prostrate. "Rise, Commander," she said. "Explain why you have drawn blood in my hall without my permission." Kaelor rose. His scales had gone from silver to the color of storm clouds. "The human demanded sanctuary, my queen. He has nothing to offer, no fleet, no resources, no connections. He is worthless." "I did not demand," Callum said. "I asked. There is a difference." Seraphine's gaze returned to him. "And what would you offer for sanctuary, human? What do you have?" Callum considered the question, honestly considered it. He had nothing. His ship was scrap. His people were scattered across a dozen systems, forgotten and unwanted. Clara was ash. Ren was ash. The earth that had colonized New Meridian was 3 generations of faster-than-light travel away and had stopped answering calls decades ago. He had the clothes he was wearing. He had the scars on his hands. He had the knowledge in his head. "Labor," he said. "I can work. I am an engineer. I can fix things." Laughter erupted from the nobles, low, cruel, dismissive, the sound of beings who had never known desperation, mocking someone who had never known anything else. Kaelor smiled. His teeth were too many and too sharp. "We have machines for labor, human. We have engineers born to castes higher than your entire species." "Then I have nothing," Callum said, "but I am asking anyway." Seraphine raised one hand. The laughter stopped as though she had reached into every throat and closed it. "Leave us." Kaelor's eyes widened. "My queen, protocol demands, leave us." 3 words, not loud, not sharp, but they were the words of a woman who had ruled the Solvarian Empire for 23 years and had grown very tired of being questioned in her own hall. The nobles filed out in rigid formation. Their robes whispered against the crystal floor. Kaelor Vex was last, and the look he gave Callum as he passed was not anger. It was something colder, a promise held in reserve, a calculation filed away for later. The great doors sealed behind them with the sound of a tomb closing. Seraphine circled him slowly. She studied him from every angle, the way a sculptor might study a block of stone before deciding whether it held anything worth carving. He stood still and let her look. He had nothing to hide. He had nothing left to hide with. "You are not afraid," she said. "No." Why, I have already lost everything, Your Majesty. Fear requires something left to lose. She stopped in front of him, close enough that he could see the patterns shifting beneath her skin, close enough that he could feel a faint cold radiating off her. Not sickness, not poor circulation, just what she was. My advisors will demand I execute you for the insult you have shown today. Probably you are not going to apologize. For what? Telling the truth, standing when I did not know to kneel, bleeding on your floor. He shook his head slowly. I will apologize for genuine offenses, but I will not apologize for existing. She was silent for a long moment. Her expression gave nothing away. Then she spoke, and her voice was barely above a whisper. I am coming to your quarters tonight. The words landed in his chest like a fist. His heart stopped, then started, then stopped again. Your what? You will be given quarters in the Eastern Wing, basic accommodations. Tonight, after the third moon rises, I will come to you. We will speak privately. Her expression remained a mask, but her eyes did not. Her eyes held something that could not be named yet. Tell no one. If you do, I will deny it, and you will be executed for slander against the crown. Why? Callum managed. Because you are the first person in 11 years to stand in my presence and speak without calculating advantage. She turned away. Her robe swept across the blood on the floor and erased it. Do not mistake this for affection, human. I am curious, nothing more. The doors opened. Guards entered. As Callum was led from the hall, he caught one last glimpse of her. She was standing beside the empty throne. One hand rested on the armrest, and in her posture he recognized something. Loneliness, the kind that had gone so deep it had become structural, load-bearing, the kind that if you removed it might bring the whole person down. The quarters were sparse, a bed with a thin mattress, a stone table, a single window overlooking a garden unlike anything he had ever seen. Crystalline plants grew in geometric spirals. Their translucent leaves caught the light and shattered it into colors that had no names in any human language. As the first of the 3 Solvarian moons rose, the crystals began to sing, a soft, high sound, like wind chimes played by a breeze that understood harmony. Callum sat on the edge of the bed. He pressed his palms together to keep them from shaking. It was not fear. It was the crash. The moment the body understood it was not going to die today. He looked at his hands, callous, scarred, the knuckles on his right hand still swollen from the last repair he had done on the escape pod, a desperate weld on a cracked oxygen line using a soldering iron and language that would have made Clara cover Wren's ears. If Wren had lived long enough to have her ears covered, he stopped that thought. He walled it off. Put it in the place where he kept the things that would kill him if he looked at them directly. Clara, Wren. He closed his eyes. They came to him the way they always did, not as they had been at the end, not in the fire, but as they had been on the morning of the last day. Clara had been in the agricultural sector, dirt on her knees, sunlight in her hair. She had been talking to a tomato plant the way she talked to everything, like it was a person who happened to be having a slow morning. Wren had been beside her, 8 years old, braid coming loose. She had been holding a piece of crystal she had found in the drainage channel, holding it up to the light, watching it break the sun into rainbows across her palm. She had looked up at him. Daddy, look, it's got all the colors. He had knelt down beside her. He had kissed the top of her head. He had said, that's the prettiest thing I've ever seen, kiddo. And then he had stood up and gone to the engine room. because the transport was failing, because 47 people needed to get off the surface, because he was the only engineer left who could keep the fuel lines patched together with wire and prayer, and he had said, "I'll see you tonight," not "I love you." "I'll see you tonight." He had run those 3 words through his head every day since. In the pod, in the dark, in the endless silence between the failing systems. He had not seen her tonight. He had not seen either of them. The last communication he received from the surface was Clara's voice on the emergency channel. She was not calling for rescue. She was confirming that all sectors had been evacuated. She was making sure he knew that the job was done, that everyone who could be saved had been saved. And then the channel went dead, and the sky below turned white. The third moon rose. Callum had not moved. He was still sitting on the edge of the bed, hands pressed together, watching the garden sing. The garden did not care that he was grieving. The garden had been grieving in its own quiet way for centuries. It had learned something he had not yet learned. It had learned how to keep singing anyway. He was thinking about that when the wall opened. There was no seam, no mechanism. One moment, the wall was solid stone. The next, a section of it slid aside, like water pulling back from shore, and Seraphine A. Lowen stepped through. She wore simpler robes than before. Without the ceremonial weight, she looked smaller, not weak, smaller. The way a monument looks smaller when you finally stood next to it and realized it was made of the same stone as the mountain, and the mountain was tired. Her hair was loose now. It caught the moonlight and threw it back in threads of pale fire. "You are actually here," Callum said. "You doubted me." I considered the possibility that it was an elaborate test to see if I would try to escape. The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, the place where a smile might live if it were ever allowed to exist. And if it were, then I would fail it, because I have nowhere to go. She moved to the window. She looked out at the garden. In the moonlight, the crystalline plants cast shadows that moved like living things, and their song was louder now, filling the room with a sound that was almost language. "How did your wife die?" The question hit him clean, precise, aimed at something vital. Callum took a breath, held it, waited for the shaking to stop. 94,000 people lived on New Meridian when the Crimson Vanguard assault began, he said. "I do not know how many made it out. Not yet. I carry the number because someone should. Someone has to know exactly how much was lost." He paused. The garden sang into the silence. They did not invade. They burned everything from orbit. Surgical strikes on infrastructure first, then systematic incineration of every populated zone. Clara was in the agricultural sector. She was coordinating evacuations. She was getting people onto transports, organizing routes, keeping everyone calm. He looked at his hands. I was in the engine room of the last transport, trying to keep it running long enough to break atmosphere. The port thruster coupling was failing. The fuel lines were compromised. I had 47 people in the cargo hold and an engine that wanted to die, and I was holding it together with bypass cables and stubbornness. He paused again. The last communication I received was her voice on the emergency channel. She was not calling for rescue. She was confirming that all sectors had been evacuated. She was making sure I knew the job was done, and then the channel went dead, and the sky turned white. Seraphine said nothing. She was very still. "There is something else," she said finally, not a question. "Yes, tell me." He closed his eyes. I had not said the name out loud since he was pulled from the pod. He had not said it in the pod either, because if he said it, it would be real, and if it was real, he did not know how to keep breathing. "My daughter," he said, "Ren, she was 8. He opened his eyes. She did not make it to the transport. Seraphine did not move. She did not offer him comfort. She did not say the things people said, that it was not his fault, that he had done everything he could, that she was in a better place. She just looked at him, and in her face he saw something he had not expected: recognition, not sympathy, not pity, recognition. The look of one survivor identifying another. "Do you blame yourself?" she asked. Every day I replay it. What if I had been faster? What if I had left the engine to someone else and gone to the agricultural sector? What if I had said, "I love you" that morning instead of "I'll see you tonight"? He shook his head. You cannot engineer the past. You can only maintain what is still running. She sat down in the single chair. The moonlight caught the silver violet in her eyes. It scattered there like starlight caught in deep water. "My consort died 11 years ago," she said. "A plague swept through the noble houses. I survived. Grieving did not." Her voice was flat. Practice. The words of someone who had told the story so many times that it had been reduced to its bones. Everything that had once made it unbearable had been stripped away. Since then, I am considered cursed. My people believe that survivors of great loss are touched by ending, that to associate with them is to invite misfortune. The nobles tolerate me because I am competent, and the succession is complex. But no one touches me. No one stands close. No one speaks to me without calculation. She paused. "Until you." Callum considered that carefully. "So you are not curious about humans," he said. "You are curious about anyone who will actually talk to you." Something shifted in her face. "You are perceptive. I am an engineer. We troubleshoot, find root causes." He met her eyes. "You are lonely, Your Majesty." "Queens are not lonely. Queens are isolated by necessity and design." "That is not a denial." She looked away. The garden filled the silence with its slow, alien chord. "My people believe emotional expression is weakness," she said finally. "That control is virtue. I have been controlled my entire life. Perfectly composed, perfectly appropriate, perfectly alone." Her hands tightened in her lap, the only outward sign of what the words cost her. "I am exhausted human, more tired than I knew it was possible to be." Callum stood slowly. I walked to the window. He gave her space. He looked out at the garden where the crystals hummed, their strange, beautiful frequencies to moons that were not his. He was going to say something, but she spoke first, and what she said changed everything. "I did not find you by accident, Callum Whitfield." He went still. "The patrol that rescued you from your escape pod, I sent them, not as a general rescue mission. I ordered them specifically to find survivors from New Meridian. I had been monitoring your colony's distress calls for months, watching as the council debated and delayed, watching as your people died while mine argued about jurisdiction and precedent and acceptable losses." She turned back to the window. Her reflection looked back at her from the glass like the ghost of the woman she might have been. "I could not send a fleet. I did not have the political capital. High Commander Vex and his allies controlled the military appropriations. They saw no strategic value in saving a human colony." Her voice tightened. "By the time I found enough support to authorize a single patrol, New Meridian was gone. But I tracked the escape trajectories. I calculated the drift patterns." She faced him. "I sent that patrol to the coordinates where the mathematics said survivors might be found." Callum stared at her. He was trying to process it. He was failing. How many did they find, he asked. 3. The word landed like a stone dropped from a great height. 3. 3 pods, 3 humans, you and 2 others. His mouth went dry. Who? Her eyes did not leave his face. A colonel named Silas Reed and a sergeant named Jonas Barrow. Do the names mean anything to you? The room tilted. The garden went silent. Or maybe he just could not hear it anymore, because Silas Reed had been his commanding officer for the last 3 years of the siege. Silas Reed had been the man who ordered him into the engine room on the last day. Silas Reed had shaken his hand on the boarding ramp and said, "Whitfield, keep her flying. That's an order." And Silas Reed had gone back into the agricultural sector to find one more group of evacuees, and Callum had assumed he had died there. He had watched the sky turn white, and he had assumed everyone he loved and everyone he served with was gone. And Jonas Barrow, who had once given Callum his last ration bar during a supply lockdown, because he said Callum looked hungrier. Jonas Barrow, who had told terrible jokes over the comm channel during firefights just to make the younger soldiers laugh. Jonas Barrow, 39 years old and hard as a hammer and soft as anything on the inside. Alive, both of them, alive. Where are they? Callum's voice came out cracked. In the southern basement compound. My personal steward has been sheltering them for 5 weeks. Neither of them knows about you, and you cannot know about them. Not officially. Not through any channel that Kaylor Vex can trace. Can I see them? Seraphine looked at him for a long moment. Yes, the southern basement was carved deeper into the mountain than the engineering levels. The corridors were narrower. The air was colder. The bioluminescent strips along the ceiling gave everything a pale silver cast that made shadows behave in ways they should not have. Callum walked behind Seraphine. Her steward, a small hooded figure who had not spoken once, walked ahead. They did not pass another Solvarian for 20 minutes. Callum could hear his own heart. He could hear the blood moving in his ears. He had been given 3 months to accept that everyone he loved was dead. He had accepted it. He had folded it up and put it in the deepest drawer of himself and locked it with a key he had thrown into a river he could never revisit. And now, tonight, someone was telling him that 2 of them had come back. 2, not Clara, not Wren, but 2. He did not know if he could hold it. He did not know if the walls he had built could survive being touched. He had made peace with the shape of his ruin. He was afraid that reopening it would not make him whole. It would just make him bleed again in places he had already learned to seal. The steward stopped at a plain metal door. She placed a hand on the surface. The door thawed open. Callum walked through. The room was small, a common room of some kind. 2 figures sat at a low stone table. One of them had a mug of something steaming between his palms. The other was leaning back in his chair, eyes closed, looking like a man who was pretending to sleep because he did not know what else to do with his time. The one with the mug looked up first. His hair had gone almost entirely white in 3 months. It had been steel gray before. His face was thinner. The bones showed more. The eyes were the same though, sharp, steady. The eyes of a man who had never in his life turned away from something that needed looking at. Whitfield, Colonel Silas Reed said. Just that, just his name. Callum could not speak. The other man opened his eyes. Jonas Barrow. He looked at Callum. He blinked again. His mouth opened and no sound came out. Then he stood up so fast his chair fell over. Callum's throat closed. He nodded. That was all he could do. Reed set his mug down, slowly, deliberately, the way he did everything. He stood. He crossed the room. He was 55 years old, and he moved like a man who had been carrying something too heavy for too long and was afraid to set it down in case he could never lift it again. He stopped in front of Callum. He looked at his face. He put a hand on his shoulder. His grip was iron. "Whitfield," he said again, and his voice broke, just a little, just once. Just enough that Callum understood he was not the only one who had thought he was alone. Jonas came up next to them. He did not say anything. He put his forehead against Callum's shoulder for a long second. He did not cry. Jonas Barrow did not cry. He just breathed, and Callum realized he was breathing too, and he was breathing hard, and the walls he had built were not coming down, but there was a crack in them now, a crack big enough that light was getting through. They stood there like that for a long time. 3 men, 2 colonels worth of history, 1 kid who had been 8 years old and was not here. Nobody said anything. Nobody needed to. They sat around the stone table. Reed took his mug back. Jonas righted his chair. Callum sat across from them. They looked at each other like men trying to confirm something. "Cal," Jonas said finally, "you look terrible. You look worse. 3 months in a pod'll do that." "Yeah." Silence. Reed was watching him. "Your family," Reed said. It was not a question. Callum shook his head. "Just once." Reed closed his eyes. His jaw worked. He did not open his eyes for a long time. When he did, they were wet, but there were no tears. "I'm sorry, son. So am I." Jonas cleared his throat. "Cal, listen. I have to tell you something." "What?" "When we were pulled out of the pods, I asked the crew about the evacuation, about the last transport. They pulled the record. I saw the passenger manifest." Callum's stomach turned to ice. "Jonas." "I know," Jonas said quickly. "I know, she's not on it. Neither of them are. But I looked because I had to look. You understand?" "Yeah." "But Cal," Jonas leaned forward. His voice was quiet. "Everybody on that transport made it. All 47. You did that. You held the engine together and you got them out. 47 people are alive because you were where you were supposed to be." Callum could not answer. His hands were shaking. He put them in his lap. Reed was still watching him. "Whitfield." "Sir, that transport wouldn't have made it to orbit without you. I know that. Barrow knows that. And I am telling you now, as your commanding officer, that you did your job. You did it under conditions that would have broken any 3 men I ever served with. And I am not going to let you sit here and tell yourself you should have been somewhere else. You were exactly where you were supposed to be." His voice was steady now. The break had passed. "You understand me, son?" Callum did not trust himself to speak. He nodded. Reed nodded back. Then Jonas leaned forward again. "Cal, there is something else you should know. Not tonight, but soon." "What?" "When the buoy went dark on day 2 of the assault, I was in the auxiliary comm shack. I got out with an emergency data pull, 6 years of relay logs, every call our colony sent, every acknowledgement we ever received. I put it on a hard crystal. I carried it in the pod for 3 months, in a pocket sewn into my flight suit." Callum stared at him. "You brought the buoy log out?" "I did." "Why?" "Because someone was going to want to know what happened, and I did not know if anyone would ever ask. So I brought it, just in case." Jonas shrugged. "Turns out someone is going to want to know." Reed was watching Jonas with quiet approval. "Barrow, you've been sitting on that for 3 months and did not mention it. Was not sure it was safe to mention, sir. Until now. Until Cal was here. That was the end of it. For now. Seraphine had been standing near the door, quiet, watching, not participating. Now she stepped forward. Gentlemen. Reed looked up. He did not stand, but something in his posture changed, and Callum saw that Reed understood without being told who she was. Reed had spent 30 years in uniform. He recognized a person of consequence when he saw one, even one dressed in unmarked robes in a basement compound. Your Majesty, Reed said, I owe you a debt I can't pay. You owe me nothing yet, Colonel. Yet. She moved to the table. She did not sit. She stood at the end of it and looked at 3 men who had all lost, more than most people would lose in 10 lifetimes. I did not save your lives out of mercy, she said. I saved them because I need something. I would like to be honest about that with you, because I believe you have earned honesty. Reed inclined his head. Talk. There is a war happening in this palace, Seraphine said. It has been happening for 11 years. It has no fleets. It has no artillery. It has one target, and that target is me. And the man conducting it, the man with the blade at Callum's throat this morning, has been very patient and very good at what he does. Jonas whistled low. Damn. He is trying to kill you, Reed asked. He is trying to remove me. There is a distinction and it matters. But yes, eventually, if nothing changes. Callum was watching her. He was starting to see it, the whole shape of it. And you need us for what? He asked. She looked at him. Only him. I need eyes in places I cannot reach. I need hands that belong to no caste. I need people who cannot be bought and cannot be threatened by the structures Kaylor Vex has spent a decade building. My engineers report to a committee he controls. My guards answer to a chain of command he has infiltrated. My court has been carefully groomed to isolate me. There is no one in this palace I can fully trust. Except 3 humans who owe you their lives, Reed said. Except 3 humans who owe me nothing, Seraphine corrected. I saved you because it was right. I am asking for your help because it is necessary. Those are separate transactions. You may say no. I will still shelter you. I will still find you a way out. What I cannot do is fight this war alone anymore. I have tried. I am losing. Silence. Jonas leaned back in his chair. Reed looked at Callum. Callum looked at Reed. They did not need to speak. They had spent 6 years communicating without speaking. Reed turned back to Seraphine. What do you need us to do? There is sabotage in the systems that keep me alive. Power regulation, environmental controls, life support in the Eastern Wing. It has been ongoing for at least 7 months. My engineering committee reports show no issues. The sensor data shows severe degradation. Someone is falsifying reports. Someone with authority. Kaylor Vex, Callum said. Almost certainly, but I need proof. Documented, undeniable, enough to bring before the full Council of Houses, not the security subcommittee he owns. If I move without proof, he will discredit me. He has been building the case for my incompetence for years. I need to counter it with facts. Reed nodded once. How long? Months, possibly many. The work will be slow, quiet, underground, literally underground. You will be assigned to the maintenance caste, the lowest tier, invisible. If you are caught, I cannot protect you. If you succeed, I cannot publicly credit you. It will be thankless and dangerous and probably terrible, and it is the most important thing I could ask of anyone." Jonas grinned, the first grin Callum had seen from him in 3 years. "So business as usual then," Reed snorted. "You in Whitfield." Callum thought about Clara, about Wren, about the transport engine and the 47 souls and the sky turning white below them. He thought about a woman who had spent 11 years being alone in a room full of people. He thought about a man who had drawn a blade across his throat that morning and would have been very pleased to see it finish the cut. He thought about what Reed had said, about being exactly where he was supposed to be. I had spent 3 months in a pod thinking he was supposed to be dead. Maybe he had been wrong. Maybe he was supposed to be here. Maybe there was still one more job. "I'm in," Callum said. Reed nodded. Jonas nodded. Seraphine looked at them for a long moment. Her eyes were harder to read than any face Callum had ever seen, but there was something behind them now that had not been there before. Not hope, not gratitude. Something quieter than either. Something like relief. The relief of a person who had been carrying something alone for so long that they had forgotten there was another way. "Then we begin tomorrow," she said. She turned to leave. At the door, she paused. She looked back at Callum. "Just Callum. Do not thank me yet. I have not decided if you are useful or merely interesting. The difference matters considerably to your survival." And then she was gone. The door thawed shut behind her. Reed looked at Callum. "So," Reed said, "Alien Queen. Yes. Fighting a shadow war. Yes. 11 years. Yes." Reed was quiet for a moment. "Whitfield. Sir, the last order I gave you on New Meridian. You remember it? Keep her flying." "That's right." Reed picked up his mug. It had gone cold. He drank it anyway. "Sounds like we've got another engine to keep flying." Jonas laughed. It was a rough sound, rusty from disuse. "Sounds like it." Callum sat back. He looked at the 2 men across from him. Alive, both of them, alive, and a woman who had been buried in her own palace for 11 years and had finally reached out for a hand. He was going to take that hand. He was going to help her, because that was what he did. It was the only thing he knew how to do. Outside, high above them, in the eastern wing, the crystalline plants in a private garden sang softly to 3 moons. Somewhere in the palace, a high commander named Kalor Vex was studying reports and calculating angles and did not yet know that 3 humans had just decided he was going to lose. The first night of the war ended. The second was already coming. The engineering cast worked in the lowest levels of the palace complex. It was a world beneath a world. Corridors carved from raw stone, unpainted, unpolished, lit by strips of bioluminescent material that cast everything in a pale green glow that made healthy skin look sick and sick skin look dead. The air was warm and thick, ozone, lubricant, the faint metallic sweetness of Solvarian machinery doing what it had been designed to do centuries before any human had looked up at the stars and wondered. 3 humans were assigned to maintenance, the lowest rung of the lowest caste. Callum Whitfield replaced filtration seals. Colonel Silas Reed carried tool crates. Sergeant Jonas Barrow scrubbed corrosion off coupling housings with a wire brush and language that would have gotten him written up in any regular unit. They were furniture, background noise, 3 pairs of human hands attached to a species that did not matter. Nobody watched them because nobody thought they were worth watching, which was exactly why they could do what they were about to do. The rhythms of the palace revealed themselves in weeks. Callum learned them the way he had learned every environment he had ever survived, by understanding it. Shift changes happened at precise intervals, synchronized to the rotation of the three moons. Information moved through the caste system like water through channels, flowing downward from the noble houses, filtered by the administrative layers, arriving in the engineering depths, stripped of anything that might give the lower castes ideas above their station. The Solvarians used crystalline matrices, where humans use silicon circuits. They routed power through biological conduits that grew and healed themselves, a technology so advanced it made human engineering look like cave drawings by comparison. But the principles held. Systems had load tolerances, components had failure modes, and when something was wrong, the machinery told you. If you knew how to listen. Callum knew how to listen. It was the only thing he had ever been truly good at. Clara used to tease him about it. She would be telling him about her day, about the new tomato cultivar, about the irrigation dispute she had mediated, and he would suddenly hold up a hand and say, "Do you hear that?" And she would listen and hear nothing. And he would say, "Exactly. The compressor in Sector 4 just stopped cycling." And he would kiss her cheek and disappear into the maintenance tunnels for 3 hours. And she would shake her head and smile and save his dinner. He missed that. He missed being known by someone who found his obsessions endearing rather than strange. He missed the sound of Ren shouting through the vent grating, "Daddy, when are you coming out?" He missed the way Clara would answer for him, "When he's done, sweetie," same as always. But those were memories he had put away. He had a job to do. Machines wanted to work. You just had to listen to what they were telling you. And what the machines in the Eastern Wing were telling him was that something was very wrong. It started with power regulation, small fluctuations, barely noticeable unless you were looking for them. A micro drop in voltage here, a thermal spike there, the kind of variations that any single one could be explained by age or wear or the normal entropy of complex systems. But Callum had spent 6 years maintaining the infrastructure of New Meridian during a siege. I had learned that patterns mattered more than incidents. 1 fluctuation was noise, 2 were coincidences, 12 spread across the first 6 weeks of his monitoring in a pattern that mapped perfectly onto the life support and environmental systems of the Queen's private chambers were something else entirely. He pulled the maintenance logs for the Eastern Wing. They were clean, immaculate. Every inspection completed on schedule. Every component rated within acceptable parameters. Every system certified as fully operational. But when he cross-referenced the logs against the actual readings from the sensors, he could access the numbers did not match. The log said the power regulation was stable. The sensor said it was degrading. Someone was filing reports that described a reality that did not exist. Callum knew what that looked like. On New Meridian, in the final months before the Crimson Vanguard assault, he had seen the same pattern. Systems that looked fine on paper but were hemorrhaging capability in practice. The difference was that on New Meridian, the degradation had been caused by a siege. Here it was being caused by someone on the inside. He brought his findings to Reed and Jonas in the maintenance annex. During a lunch break, they were not really eating. He laid it out on a datapad. Reed studied it in silence for a long time. Then he said, "Show me who signed the reports." Callum flipped through. Reed's eyes narrowed. All routed through the Engineering Oversight Committee. Yes, which is chaired by Vex. Reed was quiet. Jonas said, so we've got a paper trail from the commander to falsified reports covering deliberate sabotage of the Queen's chambers. Yes, that's not sabotage, Cal. That's murder in slow motion. Yes. Reed set the data pad down. He looked at both of them. Then we start documenting everything, every reading, every log, every discrepancy. We do not move on it. We do not tell the Queen yet. We build a case that a full council cannot dismiss. How long? Jonas asked. Reed did the math the way he always did. Months, maybe more. This is not a firefight. This is a siege, and we know how to run a siege. Callum nodded. 6 years of siege. They knew. The three of them found their rhythm quickly, the way old soldiers do. Jonas took the surveillance. He mapped guard rotations. He memorized shift changes. He identified which supervisors were fair and which were cruel and which could be avoided altogether. He built a mental map of the palace that would have made an intelligence officer weep. Reed took the command function. He set priorities. He decided which repairs came first. He held them to standards none of the Solvarian engineers would have recognized, not because the Solvarians were bad at their jobs, because they had never been asked to do a job under conditions where failure meant everyone died. Reed had, so had Jonas, so had Callum. That was the difference. And Callum did the actual work, the listening, the touching, the slow, patient conversation with machines that had been quietly telling their story for months and had finally found someone willing to hear. He would place his hand on a coupling housing and feel the heat signature. He would touch a conduit junction and feel the vibration. He would close his eyes in a maintenance corridor and just listen to the whole system breathing the way a doctor listens to a chest with a stethoscope. And then he would tell Reed what was wrong, and Reed would file it, and Jonas would figure out how to get them to the site without being seen, and the three of them would repair what they could and document what they could not. And every night when Callum lay down on the thin mattress in his sparse quarters, he would think about Clara, about the way she used to lean against him on the observation deck of New Meridian during binary sunsets, about how she used to say, I think the universe wants us to pay attention. I was paying attention now. He was paying attention for all three of them. The nights were the hardest. Callum would work double shifts, his assigned duties during the day, the secret repairs after third moonrise. He would move through the maintenance quarters like a ghost, replacing degraded components, rerouting power flows, installing backup systems he built from salvage parts and stubborn engineering philosophy. He would sleep 3 hours. He would get up. He would do it again. And in the small hours when the work was too delicate for hurry and the loneliness settled into the corridors like fog, he would hear Clara's voice, not memory, something closer to memory, the last transmission from the emergency channel. All sectors evacuated, all transports away. This is Whitfield Ag signing off. Callum, I hope you can hear this. A pause, static. Kiss Wren for me if you get to her in time. That was the part that killed him every night. If you get to her in time. Clara had known. She had known even then that Wren was still in the school shelter, that the school shelter was in a sector that had already been marked for evacuation and had already failed to evacuate, that Callum was in the engine room and could not get to Wren, and Clara herself was too far away and could not get to Wren either. She had known, and she had said, if you get to her in time. She had left him the smallest possible door because she loved him too much to close it, and he had not gotten to her. He had not gotten to either of them. He had gotten to the engine, and the engine had lifted off, and 47 strangers were alive because of it, and the two people he loved most were ash. He would lie in the dark and turn Clara's last words over in his head like a river stone. Then he would get up, and he would go back to work, because there was one more engine, and it belonged to a queen who was still trying to hold herself together, and Callum Whitfield did not walk away from engines. Not anymore, not ever again. Reed found him in the maintenance annex one night, 2 months into the work, 3 in the morning by Solvarian time. Callum had fallen asleep at the workbench, his head on his arms, a soldering iron still warm in one hand. He woke to the sound of Reed setting a cup of something down beside him. "Drink it," Reed said. Callum sat up, his neck cracked in 3 places. "What is it?" "Something the Queen's steward left for us. She said it's what Solvarians drink when they cannot sleep." Callum sniffed it. It smelled like nothing. He drank it anyway. It tasted like warm rain. Reed sat down across from him. They looked at each other. Reed was 55 years old. His hair had gone all the way white now. His face was carved into something harder than it had been 3 months ago. His eyes were the same though, sharp, steady, the eyes of a man who had never in his life turned away from something that needed looking at. "You are not sleeping," Reed said. "No, you are not eating enough. Not much appetite." Reed was quiet. Then he said, "Whitfield, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen to me." "All right." "When I lost Rachel 10 years ago, the cancer, it took her 6 months, and for those 6 months I was in the hospital every day. Every day. I watched her die by inches, and when she was gone, I went back to base and I took a 2-week leave, and I sat in an empty house and I drank too much, and I thought I was going to just disappear." Callum said nothing. Reed was not looking at him. He was looking at the wall. "And I want you to understand what saved me. It was not time. Time is a lie. Time did not save me. What saved me was that the first morning I went back on duty, I had 18 kids in my unit who needed me to know what I was doing, and I could either fall apart or I could get up and be the person those kids needed. And I got up, because Rachel would have kicked my ass sideways if she thought I was letting other people's kids die, because I could not handle my own grief." He turned back to Callum. "Now listen to me, because I am only saying this once. Yes, sir. Your daughter did not die because you were slow. Your daughter did not die because you were somewhere else. Your daughter died because this galaxy is short on kindness and long on cruelty, and the people who make those decisions do not care what it costs. And our job, yours, mine, Barrow's, our job is to take a little bit off the cruelty side of the scale. That's it. That's the whole job." Callum's throat closed. He could not answer. Reed picked up his own cup. He took a slow sip. "You did not fail Wren's son. The world failed her, and now the world is going to fail this queen, and we are going to stand in front of that failure and say, no, not this one, not today. That is how we honor the ones we lost, not by drowning in them, by making sure the next one gets to grow up." Callum put his face in his hands. He did not cry, not fully. Something inside him that had been locked shut for months, bent just a little, not open, bent, enough for Reed to see it and to know he had been heard. Reed set his cup down. He stood up. He clapped Callum once on the shoulder. "Get some sleep, Whitfield. We have another repair tomorrow." He walked out. He did not look back, and Callum sat in the annex for a long time with his hands over his face and let one wall come down. The Queen's private garden was forbidden to all but her personal staff. Callum went anyway. He had to. He had found something too important to send through the encrypted channel Seraphine had established for reports, something that had to be shown, not described. He slipped through a service hatch during the third shift rotation. He climbed 2 levels through a ventilation shaft that was not designed for human shoulders. He emerged into the garden through a panel that had not been opened in years. The seal cracked when he pushed it. Air that smelled of dust and neglect released around him, and then he was in a different world. The garden was beautiful in a way that made his chest ache. Crystalline plants grew in spiraling formations. Their translucent structures caught the moonlight and broke it into colors that had no names in any human language. The air was cool, clean, carrying the soft, high sound of the crystals like wind chimes, played by something that understood harmony at a molecular level. Small organisms that might have been insects or might have been something else drifted between the formations. Their bodies glowed with a faint bioluminescence. They left trails of light in the air behind them, like the memory of movement. Seraphine was sitting on a bench at the center of the garden. She was still dressed in formal robes from some ceremony, heavy, ornate, clearly uncomfortable. She looked like a woman who had been performing a role for so long that she had forgotten how to stop, even when the audience was gone. "You should not be here," she said without turning. "The power regulation in your wing is failing. I know. Your reports have been thorough." "There is something the reports do not say." She turned then. The moonlight caught her eyes, bottomless. "Show me." They moved through the maintenance quarters together. The queen of the Solvarian Empire, following a human laborer through the guts of her own palace, through passages she had never seen, past machines that kept her world alive and that she had never been permitted to understand. Callum showed her the readings. He showed her the patterns. He showed her the signs of deliberate neglect disguised as routine wear. He pulled up the falsified maintenance logs side by side with the actual sensor data. He watched her face as she processed the gap between what she had been told and what was real. She did not panic. She did not rage. She absorbed the information the way a general absorbs a battlefield report, with the focused calm of someone who had been expecting bad news and was almost relieved to finally have it confirmed. "Vex controls the Engineering Oversight Committee," she said. Her voice was steady. Her hands were not. "Yes, you are suggesting he is trying to kill me. I am suggesting the evidence points that way. What you do with it is above my authority." She touched one of the degraded components, a power coupling that should have been replaced months ago. Its housing cracked, its output irregular. Her fingers traced the damage with a precision that surprised him. She understood machinery better than he had expected, or perhaps she simply understood failure. "There is more," she said. "Ma'am, I have been conducting my own investigation from above. I did not tell you until I had something worth telling." She looked at him. "Callum, I need to tell you 3 things, and I need you to be ready for them." He nodded. "Tell me." "The first thing," Seraphine said, "my consort, Riven Aloin, he did not die of a plague." Callum went still. "Ma'am." 11 years ago, Riven began exhibiting symptoms that our physicians called unprecedented: high fever, respiratory failure, cellular breakdown across multiple organ systems. He was dead in 3 days. It was called a plague because that was the only word our medical caste had for something that killed so quickly. The plague never spread. It killed only him. She paused. 2 weeks ago, I ordered a discreet analysis of tissue samples preserved from his autopsy, preserved by an archivist who is now dead, of what was reported as natural causes. The analysis was conducted by a physician I have known since I was a child. The physician had to be smuggled into and out of the palace under a false name. Callum waited. Riven was poisoned slowly through his personal respiratory filter. The compound was Solvarian in origin, rare, expensive, untraceable except through the manufacturer, and the manufacturer's records were destroyed 9 years ago in what was called a warehouse fire. Callum did not speak. He could not yet. 2 years after Riven's death, Seraphine said, Kaelor Vex was elevated to High Commander from mid-rank very quickly, filling a vacuum that was created by his death. You are saying, I am saying, he did not simply benefit from Riven's death. He arranged it. Callum closed his eyes. He thought about a woman who had spent 11 years believing her husband had been taken by a random illness. 11 years grieving, 11 years asking why, 11 years accepting that there was no answer, and there had been an answer the whole time. The answer had been standing at council meetings. The answer had been holding blades to human throats in the Great Hall. The answer had been slowly bending the systems of her private chambers toward the same fate. That is not the second thing, Callum said quietly. No, tell me the second thing. She did not sit down. She stood in the pale green light of the maintenance corridor. The bioluminescence caught the pale threads of her hair and held them. For 11 years, she said, I have been alone. I know. Do you? Yes. I do not think you do. Not yet. I want you to hear this correctly because I have not said it out loud to anyone. He nodded. She took a breath. I have believed for a very long time that the isolation surrounding me was the natural consequence of grief, that my people, being what they are, could not bear to stand close to someone marked by loss, that the empty chairs at my table and the cross corridors and the whispered warnings about the curse of my presence were the way things simply were. Her voice tightened, only slightly. I have believed for a very long time that if no one touched me, it was because there was something wrong with me. Callum did not interrupt. 2 weeks ago, in cross-referencing correspondence records, with committee minutes with staff assignments, I found the pattern. Every noble who had shown me even the smallest kindness in the past decade had been reassigned. Every servant who had held my gaze had been transferred. Every whisper about my curse could be traced backward through intermediaries to a single source. She looked at him. He built my loneliness, piece by piece, year by year. He cultivated the superstition around me the way a farmer cultivates a field. He made sure that anyone who might have stood beside me was given a reason to step away. She was very still. The isolation was not a symptom, it was a weapon, and I have been living inside it believing it was my own fault. Something in her voice broke, not all the way, just enough for Callum to understand what it had cost her to say it. Do you know what that does to a person? She asked. Her voice was barely above a whisper. To believe that your very presence is poison. Callum stepped closer to her. He did not touch her. He would not yet. He stopped when he was close enough that she could feel him being there. I know what it does, he said. It hollows you out. It leaves you thinking that everyone you love is safer without you. It makes you afraid of your own hands. She looked at him. Her eyes were shining, not tears. Solvarians did not cry the way humans did, but something in her had gone briefly, brilliantly bright. Yes, she said, you are not poisoned, Your Majesty. I know that now. I am sorry. So am I. She was silent for a long moment. The garden above them was still singing its faint, distant song. It drifted down through the ventilation shafts and filled the maintenance corridor with a sound that seemed to belong to another world entirely. Tell me the third thing, Callum said. She nodded. Because there was a third thing, because there was always a third thing. 2 months ago, Seraphine said, a legislative package was submitted to the Council of Houses. It was called the Governance Modernization Framework. It was 300 pages long. Most of it was administrative, land use, tariff schedules, guild registrations, the kind of legislation that no one reads carefully because it is designed not to be read carefully. There is something buried in it, Callum said. Yes. What? A provision. Section 82, Subclause 4, Paragraph 12. It amends the succession laws. It allows the military nobility to assume regency authority if the reigning monarch is declared unfit for rule. The criteria for unfitness are vague, deliberately so. She listed them. Spiritual contamination, prolonged inability to maintain court relationships, failure to produce an heir, persistent isolation. She paused. After each one, she let each one land. Callum felt his stomach turn to cold water. Every criterion, he said slowly, is a condition he created. Yes, he is not just trying to kill you. No, he is trying to have you legally removed. He wants your body alive and your throne empty and the paperwork clean. Yes, because a dead queen creates a martyr. Yes, and a removed queen creates a precedent. Seraphine nodded. She was almost smiling, not with warmth, with the grim recognition of one strategist meeting another. You understand quickly, Callum Whitfield. I understand siege warfare. This is not warfare. Yes, it is. He has been besieging you for a very long time. He just did it with silence instead of artillery, and patience instead of force, and he almost won. She did not answer. She did not need to. They stood in the pale green light of the maintenance corridor. Two people who had each spent years thinking they were alone in different rooms and had finally realized the rooms shared a wall. The weeks that followed moved with new urgency. The three humans worked with the coordinated efficiency of a unit that had been operating together for years. Because they had been operating together for years, Callum documented the sabotage. Reed built the tactical case. Jonas mapped Kaylor's network of allies through observation of who spoke to whom, who ate with whom, who was seen entering which chambers at what hours. Jonas had a memory for faces that had once made him a very effective sniper. He turned it now on the noble houses of the Solvarian court. Seraphine coordinated from above. She met with nobles. She suspected of quiet loyalty. She never told them what she knew. She simply listened, asked careful questions, noted who spoke well of Vex and who did not, who had benefited from the past decade and who had been marginalized. She was patient in a way that terrified Callum a little. She had waited 11 years. She could wait 11 more if she had to, but she would not need to because they had a plan, because they had a timeline. They had been working for nearly 5 months. 6 weeks remained until the full Council of Houses would convene for the seasonal governance review. It was one of the few sessions Kaylor could not cancel or control. It was a public forum. Every noble house represented, every caste leader present. If they could bring the evidence to that session, if they could present it before Kaylor understood what was happening, then the whole shadow war of the past 11 years would suddenly become visible to a room full of people who could not unsee it. That was the plan. That was the engine. They just had to keep it flying for 6 more weeks. Then one evening in Callum's sparse quarters, the wall opened without warning. Not Seraphine, someone else. An old man, very old. Callum had never seen him before, but he recognized what he was seeing. A Solvarian noble, the kind whose age was measured in centuries, whose skin had gone from porcelain to the color of old parchment, whose hair was pure white and thin as spider silk, whose eyes even at this age were sharp. He walked with a cane. He was breathing carefully. He was afraid. "You are Callum Whitfield," the old man said. His voice was thin but clear. "Yes, my name is Marek Solon. I served as chief steward to Consort Riven A. Lowen for the last decade of his life. I am 78 years old by our reckoning. My physicians tell me I will not see the next season. I have come to tell you something before I run out of time." Callum stood up. "Please, sit." The old man sat. He set his cane across his knees. He was silent for a long moment, gathering himself. "I have been a coward for a very long time," Marek said finally. Callum did not answer. "I was there the night Riven died. I was in the antechamber. I saw the physicians come out. I saw the queen collapse in a corridor when she thought no one was watching, and I saw her get up 10 minutes later and walk into that room and hold his hand until his last breath. I saw all of it." His voice did not shake. His hands did. "And I knew, even then, I knew something was wrong. Riven had been in perfect health. Riven did not fall ill without warning. I knew, and I said nothing, because Kalor Vex began his rise the following month, and Kalor Vex was already even then the kind of man you did not stand against without being ready to bury someone." He paused. He looked at Callum. "I was not ready to bury anyone, so I said nothing. For a very long time I said nothing, and every year I watched that woman sit alone in a court full of people, and every year I told myself it was too late, that saying something now would only make it worse, that she was better off without an old man's guilt." He stopped. He breathed. "I was lying to myself. I was letting her rot because I was afraid." "Sir," Callum said quietly, "why are you telling me this now?" "Because the queen has been meeting with certain nobles, very quietly. She has not asked me anything, but I have heard the whispers. I have heard the way Kalor's people are starting to move. Something is coming, and I would rather die having said something than live having said nothing." He reached into his robe. He produced a small crystal. He set it on the table. "This contains everything I remember, every conversation I overheard, every unusual order I saw executed, every name of every servant who was reassigned in the weeks after Riven's death. I have been keeping it since the beginning. I never expected to give it to anyone, but if the queen is finally moving, if there is finally a chance," his voice caught, "please give it to her. Tell her I am sorry. Tell her I should have stood beside her a long time ago. Tell her I am standing beside her now, even if all I have left is one old crystal and a few weeks of breath." Callum picked up the crystal. It was warm. He held it carefully. "I will give it to her," he said. "Tonight." Marek Solane closed his eyes, his whole body eased, as if he had been holding something for a very long time and had just now set it down. "Thank you, young man." "You are not too late, sir." The old man's eyes opened. They were shining. "That is a very generous thing to say." "It is the truth." Marek nodded. He stood up slowly. He picked up his cane. He walked to the hidden door. At the threshold, he turned back. "You are a good man, Callum Whitfield. I hope your queen knows what she has in you." And then he was gone. Callum brought the crystal to Seraphine that same night. They stood together in the eastern wing garden under 3 moons. She held it in her palm. She was very still. "Marek Solane," she said. Her voice was soft. "He was Riven's steward. He was always kind. I thought he had died years ago. He simply stopped appearing at court." "He never stopped watching," Callum said. "No." She closed her hand around the crystal. Her eyes were shining again in that bright way that was not tears. "There is one," she whispered. "There is one who remembered. Yes, he waited a long time to say something. Yes, and he came before he died." "Yes, Your Majesty." She looked up at him. Callum's breath caught. She was standing very close, closer than she had ever stood. The patterns beneath her skin were moving in slow, deliberate frost. Silver-violet eyes on his face, platinum hair drifting in the faint breeze off the crystal garden. She reached out. She touched his hand. Not a handshake, not comfort, just 2 fingers against the back of his knuckles. 2 seconds. Her skin was cool. The patterns rippled where they touched a small, silent bloom of frost light that traveled up her arm and faded slowly as she pulled back. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them needed to, because for the first time in over a decade, a Solvarian queen had chosen to touch someone, and for the first time in 3 months, a human engineer had felt something other than ash. She stepped back. She composed herself. 6 weeks, she said quietly. 6 weeks, he answered. Then she was gone through the hidden passage, and Callum stood alone in the garden with the crystalline plants singing their strange chord to 3 moons, and he did not feel alone. Not exactly. They almost made it. They were 2 weeks from the Council of Houses. The evidence was almost complete. Marek Solane's crystal had opened doors they had not known existed. Names of servants who had been reassigned had become witnesses. Witnesses had become documented testimony. Documented testimony had become the beginning of a case that even Kaelor Vex's carefully constructed committees would struggle to bury. They were almost there. Almost. Which is when Kaelor's agents found the backup system. Not all of it. Not enough to prove anything conclusive, but enough. Enough to know that someone had been accessing restricted systems in the Eastern Wing, enough to trace unauthorized maintenance to third shift schedules, enough to suspect, though not yet prove, who was responsible. Callum was in the maintenance annex when the guards came. He heard them coming. Anya had time to slide the current data crystal into a hidden compartment in the workbench. He did not have time to warn Reed or Jonas. The guards did not have to look far to find them. They took all 3 at once. Callum in the annex, Jonas in the corridor, Reed in his sleeping quarters, where they broke down the door and dragged him out of bed and did not let him put on his boots. Chains. Silence. The long, slow walk up through the levels of the palace, from engineering green to noble amber, from the world where things were real and broken and fixable to the world where everything was beautiful and polished and rotten underneath. The great hall, full council in emergency session. 3 humans on their knees in the center of the crystal floor. Kaelor Vex on the prosecution platform. Magnificent, serene. The confidence of a man who had been winning for a long time and saw no reason to doubt that the winning would continue. He addressed the assembly with the practiced cadence of someone who had rehearsed this moment many times. noble houses of the Solvarian Empire, honored caste leaders, I bring before you evidence of a grave threat to our sovereignty and our crown. He gestured at Callum Reed and Jonas. These humans were granted provisional sanctuary 5 months ago. In that time, they have violated caste boundaries. They have accessed restricted areas of the palace without authorization. They have tampered with critical systems in the royal residence itself, and we have evidence that they have been meeting secretly with the Queen, alone, in violation of every protocol that governs contact with the crown. The gasps were genuine. The whispers that followed were not. Seated, Callum realized. Kaelor's allies position throughout the chamber, murmuring shock and outrage on cue. Kaelor let the noise build. Then he raised his hand. I accuse these humans of espionage, of unauthorized access to critical infrastructure, of manipulating a vulnerable monarch for purposes yet unknown. He paused. The pause was theatrical, a performer's beat before the killing line, and I accuse Her Majesty of complicity, of allowing her judgment to be compromised by prolonged association with a cursed species, of placing the security of this empire at risk through personal weakness. The chamber erupted, voices overlapping, scales flushing, the controlled chaos of a political body confronting an accusation that, if sustained, would reshape the power structure of their entire civilization. Kaelor stood above it all with an expression of solemn duty that almost concealed the triumph beneath. He turned to Seraphine on the throne. Your Majesty, I recommend immediate action. Expel these humans from Solvarian space. Sign the order yourself. Demonstrate to this council that the crown's judgment has not been compromised. Silence fell. Hundreds of faces turned toward the throne. Seraphine sat on it, motionless, her hair coiled into an elaborate formal arrangement, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond the far wall. She looked exactly like what Kaelor believed she was, a figurehead, a symbol without substance, a queen too broken to fight. Callum watched her face. He was on his knees, chains at his wrists, Reed to his left, Jonas to his right. He watched her face. She would not look at him. She would not look at any of them. Very well, she said. Her voice was flat, weary, the voice of a woman who had given up. Prepare the order. I will sign it. Something flickered across Kaelor's face. Surprise. He had expected resistance. He had prepared arguments, counterpoints, a carefully structured assault on her authority designed to make her look irrational in front of the council. Her immediate compliance left him momentarily unbalanced, a boxer who had braced for impact and found only air. The order was drawn up. A crystal stylus was placed in her hand. She signed. She did not hesitate. She did not look up. She did not look at Callum. The guards moved. They pulled the 3 humans to their feet. They dragged them from the hall. Reed was silent. Jonas was silent. Callum kept his eyes on Seraphine as long as he could. She never looked up, not once. The doors closed behind them with the sound of something ending. They put the 3 of them in separate cells, cold stone, no windows, the doors sealed with the sound of tombs. Callum sat down on the floor. He leaned his head back against the wall. He thought about Clara. He thought about Ren. He thought about how many times he was going to be asked to lose everyone before the losing finally stopped. Then he stopped thinking, because thinking would not help, because Reed had told him once, weeks ago, grief was not what saved you. Duty was. Getting up, doing the job, being the person the next kid needed you to be, the next kid, the queen. She had signed the order. She had not looked at him. Callum closed his eyes. He wanted to believe. He wanted to believe that this was a trap she had set for Kaylor, that her compliance had been strategic, that in 3 days when the full council convened, she would be ready. He wanted to believe, but he was tired, and she had not looked at him, and the cell was very cold. Somewhere above him in a private chamber in the eastern wing, Seraphine Elowin sat alone. She held a data crystal in her palm. It glowed with a faint blue light. Everything they had found, every falsified log, every sabotage component, every name of every noble that Marek Solon had remembered, every piece of the case they had built over 5 months of impossible patient work. She held it in her hand, and she waited, because in 3 days the full council of houses would convene, and she was going to use every last thing they had built. And when it was over, either Kaylor Vex would be in chains, or she would be. There was no other outcome. There was no other outcome she would accept. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders as she finally allowed herself to remove the ceremonial arrangement. Her eyes closed. She was not a broken queen. She had never been a broken queen. She had been a queen who was very patient, and she had been very, very patient for a very long time. 3 days. 3 days until the trap she had been building for 11 years finally closed. She hoped when it was over that Callum Whitfield would forgive her for not looking up. She hoped Reed would understand. She hoped Jonas would. She hoped. And Solvarian queens did not hope. Except this one, except now, except tonight. 3 moons rose over the palace. The crystalline garden began to sing. The war was about to end, and in the deepest cell in the palace, a human engineer named Callum Whitfield sat in the dark and made himself believe, not because it was easy, because it was necessary, because engines did not fly on hope alone, but they did not fly without it either. The cell was small, smaller than the escape pod had been. Callum Whitfield sat on the cold stone floor with his back against the wall and his eyes closed. He was not sleeping. He had not slept since they brought him here. Time did not move the way it should have in the dark. Sometimes an hour felt like a minute. Sometimes a minute felt like a year. He counted his own breathing to keep track, because that was what engineers did. When the instruments failed, you built new instruments. When there was no clock, you became the clock. Somewhere down the corridor, Reed was in a cell. Somewhere further down, Jonas was in a cell. They could not speak to each other. They did not need to. They were 3 men who had already spent 6 years believing they were the last ones alive. They had learned to hold each other up across distances no signal could cross. Callum knew Reed was doing the same thing he was doing right now, breathing, counting, waiting, refusing to break. He knew Jonas was probably telling himself jokes. Jonas told himself jokes when there was no one else to tell them to. It was how he kept his edges from wearing down. Callum had seen him do it in the trenches during the 3rd year of the siege, cracking one-liners at a wall, nobody laughing, except Jonas. And after a while, Callum would find himself smiling too, because something about a man who refused to stop being funny in a place designed to unmake him was its own kind of prayer. They were both alive. They were both waiting. That was enough. Callum thought about Seraphine. He thought about her not looking at him, because that was the thing. That was the thing he could not stop turning over. She had signed the order. She had not hesitated. She had not lifted her eyes even once. And he wanted to believe. God, he wanted to believe. Because if he did not believe, then the last 5 months had been a very elaborate lie he had told himself. If he did not believe, then he was going to die in this cell alongside Reed and Jonas, because he had trusted a queen who used him as a tool and dropped him when he was no longer convenient. If he did not believe, except he had seen her face in the garden the night before, except he had felt her fingers on his hand for 2 seconds under 3 moons, except he had watched her voice break when she said the word cursed, except he had watched her decide slowly and with total precision to stop being a woman who accepted her isolation and become a woman who dismantled the man who built it. He had watched that decision happen. You did not fake that. You could not fake that. He decided. He decided in the cold and the dark, with his back against a wall and his hands raw from restraints, and his family, a memory he was slowly learning to carry instead of drown in. He decided to believe her. It was the most dangerous thing he had done in 3 months, and it was the only thing that made the cell bearable. The wall opened, silently. Callum's eyes snapped up. He had been half hoping, half preparing to be executed. He was not sure which he had expected more, but the figure stepping through was Seraphine A. Lowen. She was not wearing formal robes. She was wearing something simple, dark, almost travel-worn, as if she had come through corridors that did not know her rank. She stopped just inside the cell. She looked at him. Her hair was loose. Her skin caught the pale bioluminescence of the cell strip. Her eyes were tired, really tired, the kind of tired that 11 years of pretending had built into her bones. "You are angry with me," she said. "I am tired," Callum said. "That is not the same thing." "You know it is not." "Yes, I know." She lowered herself to the cell floor. She sat across from him. Her ceremonial rank vanished the way water vanishes when it soaks into stone. There was only a woman now, a woman who had come to sit with a man she had failed to look at when it mattered most. "The order is a trap," she said. "I hoped. Kaylor expected me to fight. He had prepared for resistance. My compliance confused him. He now believes I am exactly what he has spent 11 years making me. Weak, alone, controllable. He believes he has already won. For how long? 3 days. 3 days until what? Until the Council of Houses convenes for the seasonal governance review, the full assembly, every noble house, every caste leader, every voice that matters. It is one of the few sessions Kaylor cannot cancel or control. In 3 days, I present everything we have compiled, and when it is finished, either he is in chains or I am. Callum absorbed that. Slowly, he looked at her. "Why are you here right now?" "To tell you. You could have sent a signal through the encrypted channel." "Yes." "Then why are you here?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Because I did not look at you, and I could not go 3 more days knowing that was the last thing between us." Something in Callum's chest cracked, just a little, not a break, a crack. He nodded. "Trust me," she said. 2 words, simple, enormous, the words you gave to people who could destroy you. He looked at her. He looked at a woman who had spent 11 years untouched by anyone, who had signed an order that broke her own heart to keep a trap set, who had walked down through the palace levels alone at night to sit on the cold floor of a cell with a human she had first met in chains and had decided somewhere along the way was worth telling the truth to. I trust you, Callum said. Her expression shifted. The mask cracked just for a moment, and what he saw beneath it was not a queen or a strategist or a weapon aimed at her enemies. It was a woman who had just been given something she had forgotten she was allowed to want. She stood. She moved toward the hidden door. She paused. Callum, yes. When the doors open on the third morning, whatever you see, whatever they do to you, or your men, do not fight it. Kneel if they make you kneel. Walk if they make you walk. Say nothing until I speak. You will know when. I will know when. Yes. All right. She looked at him one more time. Then she was gone, and the wall was solid stone again. And Callum sat back against the wall and did not sleep. But he was not afraid. Fear required something left to lose. And he had lost everything except one thing. He believed her. 3 days. They passed in silence and stone. Callum did not know what happened to Reed and Jonas during those 3 days. He hoped Seraphine had visited them too. He suspected she had. She was that kind of woman, the kind who understood that no one should be left alone in the dark waiting, not if she could help it, not anymore, not ever again. They came for the 3 of them on the morning of the 3rd day, 4 guards each, ceremonial armor, silver scales polished to a mirror finish, faces carved from stone. The chains on their wrists were replaced with heavier ones, ornamental black crystal. They hummed with a low frequency Callum could feel in his teeth. These were not the restraints of prisoners awaiting deportation. These were the chains of men being brought before judgment. Callum saw Reed first. Reed's white hair caught the corridor lights. His face was carved thinner than it had been 3 days ago. But his eyes were steady. He looked at Callum and gave the smallest nod. I was still Reed. Jonas came next. He looked at Callum and mouthed something that might have been a curse or might have been a joke. Probably both. He gave Callum a slow wink. Callum wanted to laugh. He did not. The 3 of them were marched forward, up through the levels, green to amber to crystal, raw stone to polished stone to the great hall. The doors opened. The 3 of them stepped through, and Callum understood immediately that this was not the Security Council. This was the full Council of Houses, every tier packed, every noble house present, every caste leader represented, hundreds of Solvarians filling the obsidian seats in formal robes of every color. Their faces ranged from curiosity to contempt, to the careful blankness of people who had learned that showing your position before the outcome was decided was a form of political suicide. Kaylor Vex stood on the prosecution platform, magnificent, serene, absolutely certain of his victory. Seraphine sat on the throne. She wore the heaviest ceremonial robes Callum had ever seen her wear, black crystal woven with silver thread that caught the light and scattered it like starlight. Her platinum hair was coiled into a formal arrangement. Her silver violet eyes were fixed forward. A crown he had never seen before sat on her head, an intricate lattice of dark metal impaled with gemstones that framed her face and made her look less like a woman and more like a monument. She sat perfectly still. Her hands rested on the arms of the throne. Her expression was a masterwork of composed indifference. She looked exactly like what Kaylor believed she was, a figurehead, a symbol, a queen who had already surrendered. The 3 humans were brought to the center of the chamber, forced to their knees. The chains pulled tight. Callum kept his eyes forward, the way he had on the first day. He waited. Kaylor addressed the assembly. the same practice cadence, the same theatrical pauses. He rehearsed the accusations again, the espionage, the unauthorized access, the complicity of a compromised monarch. He gestured at the three of them like a lawyer displaying evidence. He built his case slowly. He was in no hurry. He had already won, or so he believed. Then he turned to Seraphine. Your Majesty, before this council passes judgment on these creatures, I invite you to speak. Confirm your endorsement of this action. Let the assembly hear from the crown that our sovereignty remains intact, and that your judgment is your own. It was a trap. If she remained silent, she confirmed weakness. If she spoke and defended them, she confirmed corruption. If she condemned them, she signed away her only allies. He watched her with the patience of a man who had prepared every exit. Seraphine rose from her throne. She did not hurry. She descended the 3 steps from the platform with the same deliberate grace that had marked her entrance on the very first day. She did not stop at the prosecution platform. She did not stop at the defense position. She stopped at the center of the chamber, where everyone could see her, where no one could look away. I have reviewed the documentation these humans compiled, she said. Her voice was clear, steady. It carried to every corner of the hall without effort. It is thorough, it is accurate, and it is only the beginning of what I have to say. She reached into her robes. She withdrew a data crystal, larger than any Callum had seen her hold, brighter. It pulsed in her palm like a living thing. For the past 4 months, I have conducted my own investigation, not through the committees that Commander Vex controls, not through the channels he monitors, through my own eyes and my own judgment, tools that many in this chamber have spent a very long time telling me were broken. She activated the crystal. Holographic displays bloomed in the air above the council, cascading data, timelines, correspondence maps. Every piece of evidence Callum had compiled, every witness Marek Selene had helped identify, every falsified document, every diverted resource, every threat, bribe, whisper, and manipulation rendered in luminous blue script, filling the chamber with shifting light. The nobles stared. Some of them stood without meaning to. Some of them sat down very hard. The whispers started, then stopped, then started again. Kaelor's composure held, but his scales had gone from silver to the color of tarnished lead. Your Majesty, he began, these accusations. I am not finished, Commander. 3 words, not loud. The temperature in the chamber dropped by degrees. Kaelor closed his mouth. Seraphine turned to face the assembly directly. 11 years ago, my consort Riven, Elowen, died of what our physicians called a plague. I grieved. This court grieved with me, or so I believed. And then the whispers began, the curse, the contamination, the superstition that anyone who stood too close to me would share my misfortune. She moved through the chamber as she spoke, walking among the seated nobles, forcing them to turn and follow her, forcing them to see her, not the crown, not the symbol, her. I accepted it. I believed it. Year after year, I believed my isolation was natural, that it was the consequence of loss, that no one touched me because they were afraid of what I carried. She stopped in front of a section of the assembly where several of Kaelor's closest allies sat together. They looked up at her. They tried to be defiant. They only managed to be afraid. I was wrong. She activated another layer of the display. Documents appeared. Communications, a web of connections that spread across the hologram like a nervous system exposed to light. Commander Vex did not simply benefit from my isolation, he engineered it, systematically. Over more than a decade, he cultivated the superstition around me as a political weapon. He ensured that allies were discouraged, that supporters were marginalized, that anyone who might have stood beside me was given reason to step away. She kept walking. He planted whispers through intermediaries. He rewarded nobles who kept their distance from me. He punished those who did not. He created a court in which I was surrounded by hundreds of people and utterly alone, because a queen who is alone is a queen who can be controlled, and a queen who can be controlled can eventually be removed. She pulled up the Succession Amendment. The document appeared in the air, its clauses highlighted. This provision, buried in a governance package, currently before the Legislative Council, would allow the military nobility to assume regency authority if the reigning monarch is declared unfit for rule. The criteria for unfitness include spiritual contamination, prolonged isolation, inability to maintain court relationships, failure to produce an heir. She turned. She faced Kaylor directly. Every symptom of unfitness described in this amendment is a condition you created. Silence in the hall. Absolute silence. The kind that fell only when a very large truth had walked into a room and refused to leave. You did not just plan my removal, Commander. You built it, piece by piece, year by year. You turned my grief into a prison and my loneliness into evidence of incompetence. She let the words settle. She let the evidence glow above their heads like an accusation written in light. I sat on that throne believing I was alone because something was wrong with me, that I was cursed, that the universe had marked me for suffering, and everyone who came too close would share it. She turned to the assembly. Do you know what that does to a person? Do you know what it is like to believe that your very presence is poison? She was not performing now. The careful political calculation was gone. This was something raw, something that had been locked behind composure for 11 years and was finally in front of the people who should have heard it years ago being spoken aloud. I stopped reaching out. I stopped asking for help. I stopped believing connection was possible. Every time I tried, there was another whisper, another empty chair, another turn back, and I thought it was fate. I thought it was the curse. She looked back at Kaylor. It was not fate. It was strategy. Her voice rose, only slightly, but it filled the hall. And every one of you who participated, whether you knew what you served or not, is complicit in a very long cruelty that you have been calling tradition. Then Silas Reed stood up. He rose from his knees. The guards moved to force him back down. Seraphine held up one hand. They stopped. Reed looked at her. He looked at the assembly. He looked at Kaylor Vex. He spoke. With the council's permission, Your Majesty, I have testimony that belongs on the record. Seraphine nodded. Speak, Colonel. Reed drew a breath. His voice, when he found it, was the voice of a man who had commanded soldiers under fire for 3 decades. Steady, not loud, impossible to misunderstand. 6 years ago, when the Crimson Vanguard began attacks on our colony at New Meridian, we broadcast distress calls on standard interstellar frequencies, encrypted, marked as urgent, directed at every nearby signatory to the Mutual Defense Compact, including Solvarian relay stations. He paused. We received no response. For 6 years we received no response. We believed our calls were not being received. We believed no one heard us. He looked at Kaylor directly. We were wrong. The calls were received. Our transport logs show every one of them was acknowledged as Solvarian relay stations. Sergeant Barrow salvaged those records from a communications buoy that survived the final assault. He carried the crystal in a pocket sewn into his flight suit for 3 months in an escape pod. When he came aboard this palace, he told no one. He waited until he knew where to give it. The chamber inhaled. The relay logs match against Solvarian command records. Commander Vex's office signed off on the intercepts. Every one. For 6 years, our calls were received, reviewed, filed, ignored. His voice hardened. 94,000 people died on New Meridian. 94,000 men, women, children, farmers and teachers and engineers and 8-year-old girls who liked crystals because they broke the sun into rainbows. Callum's chest seized. He could not breathe. He kept his eyes forward. They died, Reed said, because Commander Vex made sure they did. Not through direct action, through calculated inaction, because a colony that fell would justify the militarization he wanted, because desperate humans would make useful refugees to point at as evidence that the empire's borders needed hardening, because 94,000 deaths were acceptable political capital in the war he was already waging inside this palace. He turned to the assembly. That is not a Solvarian internal matter. That is a war crime under the Mutual Defense Compact your ancestors signed, and I would like every noble house in this chamber to understand that the man standing on that prosecution platform did not just try to overthrow your queen. He got 94,000 of my people killed while he was preparing for it. The chamber erupted, not whispers this time, voices, real voices, noble standing, some shouting, some silent, some horrified. Kaelor Vex spoke, his voice cut through. Fabrication, human forgeries, the word of foreign criminals against a high commander. The word of a decorated colonel, Reed said. The records are on the crystal Her Majesty holds. I encoded them myself under her instruction. Verify them against your own archives. You will find the signatures. You will find the timestamps. You will find them because I made sure they cannot be denied. Kaelor's face did not move, but something behind his eyes did. Callum saw it. The exact moment Kaelor Vex understood he had lost. He had lost the queen. He had lost the court. He had lost the story he had been telling for a very long time. And a man who had lost that much did not accept it, not calmly, not politely. Kaelor reached for his wrist. A small flat panel Callum had assumed was a communication unit. The motion was too fast, too deliberate. The expression on Kaelor's face was the expression of a man activating a contingency he had prayed he would never need. The lights went out. Not a flicker, not a brownout, total instantaneous blackout. The hum of the crystal columns ceased. The ambient warmth of the environmental systems vanished. It was replaced by cold that seeped up from the stone floor. Somewhere in the darkness someone screamed, then others. The sound of hundreds of beings suddenly blind and afraid, stripped of the technology they had built their civilization on, reduced to the ancient animal terror of darkness and the unknown. Callum did not scream. He had spent 3 months in a pod where the lights failed constantly. He knew what to do in the dark. You stayed calm. You counted. You trusted the machinery to do what you had built it to do. He had built the backup for exactly this, not because he had known Kaelor would try to crash the grid during a council session, because he was an engineer. Engineers plan for failure the way other people plan for dinner. You assumed the worst. You built redundancy. You tested your backups, and then you waited. If you had done the work right, the waiting was the easy part. Callum counted. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. On the 4th second, the lights came back. Not the original lights. These were different. Cooler, slightly uneven. The illumination of a backup system that had not existed 5 months ago, because 5 months ago Callum Whitfield had not started building one yet. The hall blinked in the restored light. Nobles looked around in confusion. Guards gripped their weapons. Kaylor Vex stood with his hands still on the device. His face showed the particular horror of a man who has pressed the button and nothing has happened. Callum spoke. His voice was calm, almost conversational, the tone of an engineer explaining a repair to someone who did not understand machinery. The primary grid. He tried to crash it. It was supposed to bring down every system in the palace. Environmental, security, communications. In the chaos, he could have escaped, or worse. But the backup we installed kicked in. 4 seconds. The system was only down for 4 seconds. He looked at Kaylor. I told you, I am an engineer. I fix things, even things that were never meant to be fixed. Reed was smiling, just faintly. He looked at Kaylor. We held New Meridian for 6 years without reinforcement. You thought 4 seconds of darkness was going to break us. Jonas laughed, actually laughed, a rough, rusty sound. Buddy, you picked the wrong 3 humans. The Queen's personal guard marched into the chamber, not the ceremonial guards who stood at the doors of the Great Hall. These were her own, silent, lethal, loyal to the crown by oaths that predated Kaylor's rise by centuries. Kaylor saw them coming. He tried to run. He did not get 3 steps. They took him by the arms. They stripped the device from his wrist. They forced him to his knees. They bound his hands behind him in the same black crystal chains that Callum wore. The symmetry was so precise it seemed designed. Kaylor screamed as they hauled him toward the doors. Incoherent things, accusations, threats, desperate invocations of protocols and procedures that no longer applied to a man in chains. His allies in the assembly sat perfectly still, their faces performing the complex calculation of beings who were rapidly discovering that the winning side had changed. They were trying to figure out how quickly they could change with it. The doors closed behind Kaylor Vex. The screaming faded. The silence that remained was not empty. It was full of the sound of something shifting, an order rearranging itself. A power structure that had held for a very long time, cracking along lines that had been invisible until a queen decided to stop pretending they were not there. Seraphine walked to where Callum knelt. Release him. The chains fell away. His wrists were raw and bleeding. His knees ached from the crystal floor. Every muscle in his body carried the accumulated exhaustion of 5 months of double shifts and 3 days in a cell and a lifetime of losses that never seemed to end. He stood slowly. Reed stood. Jonas stood. 3 humans in the center of the great hall of the Solvarian court. Seraphine looked at Callum. Just Callum. You saved me, she said quietly. I just showed you what was there. Again, I did what I could. Perhaps. She reached up. She touched his face, a single palm against his cheek. The contact sent a shock wave through the assembly. Heads turned, scales flushed. 300 Solvarians watched their queen, their cursed and isolated and untouchable queen, place her hand against the face of a human, in full view of the entire court, in full violation of every tradition that had kept her alone for a very long time, in full defiance of every whispered warning about contamination and misfortune and the terrible cost of standing too close to someone marked by loss. Her hand was cool against his skin, her fingers trembled just slightly, the only outward sign of what this act was costing her. This man, she said, and now her voice was for the assembly, for the record, for history. This man saw me when this empire looked away. He stood in my presence without calculation. He risked his life to protect mine without expectation of reward. He has more courage in his quiet work than a decade of noble declarations from this council has produced. She turned. She looked at Reed and Jonas. These men, these two men, lost everything, their world, their homes, their families, and when a stranger asked them to help save one more life, they said yes without hesitation. This is what humans do. This is who they are. She lowered her hand from Callum's face, but she did not step back. Some of you will say, I have lost my mind, that the curse has taken me, that I am unfit to rule. She paused. Others will see a queen who refused to die quietly, who found her allies in the last place anyone expected, who chose truth over tradition and connection over isolation. She looked at Callum. And what do you see, human? The question was not for the assembly. It was for him, just for him. A private conversation held in front of 300 witnesses, intimate despite the audience, personal despite the politics. Callum thought about Wren, about the way she had held that piece of crystal up to the light on the last morning of her life, about Clara, about the last thing Clara had said on the emergency channel. He answered, I see a beginning. Seraphine was quiet for a moment. Something moved behind her eyes, something that had been growing in the spaces between their midnight conversations and was only now in this moment in front of hundreds of witnesses finding its way to the surface. Among my people, this would be the moment for a declaration, a formal statement of intention, but I find I am tired of formality, tired of performance, tired of every interaction following a script written by someone other than myself. She took a breath for the first time since he had known her. The architecture fell away, not cracking, not breaking, released. Deliberately set down. The way you set down something heavy that you have carried so long, you forgot your hands could hold anything else. Just a woman, tired and brave and asking for something she was not sure she was allowed to want. I would like to discover what we are without expectation, without protocol. Can you accept that? Callum thought about Clara, about the observation deck, about a binary sunset painting the sky in colors that no earth artist had ever imagined, about Clara saying, I think the universe wants us to pay attention. He was paying attention. I can accept that, he said. Seraphine did not smile, but the lines around her eyes softened, the tension in her shoulders released by some small degree. For the first time in 11 years, she looked like a woman who had remembered how to exhale. Then she turned to the assembly. The queen returned. The softness hardened into purpose. Her voice filled the chamber with the authority of someone who had earned the right to be heard through years of silence. There is no curse. There has never been a curse. There is only the story we tell ourselves to justify cruelty, and today that story ends. The reforms came fast. She did not wait for consensus. She did not ask for permission. The Engineering Oversight Committee is dissolved effective immediately. A new independent body will be established, staffed by engineers chosen for competence not cast. The Succession Modernization Amendment, currently before the Legislative Council, is withdrawn. The cultural provisions regarding spiritual contamination will be formally reviewed. She paused. And I will not rule an empire that uses grief as a weapon and loneliness as a tool of control. The chamber stirred. Some faces showed relief, the quiet exhalation of people who had never believed the superstition but had lacked the courage to say so. Others showed anger, the tight-jawed resistance of those whose power depended on the old structures remaining intact. Most showed uncertainty, the careful blankness of people waiting to see what came next before deciding how to feel about it. Seraphine did not wait for them to sort it out. She raised her voice again. There is one more thing. She looked at Reed, at Jonas, at Callum. 94,000 people died at New Meridian while this empire debated whether their lives mattered. That failure belongs to this court. It cannot be undone. It can only be answered. She stood taller. I am establishing the New Meridian Institute of Engineering, located here in the capital. Its mandate is threefold: to train engineers across every caste and species without prejudice, to honor the memory of those who died on New Meridian by ensuring their skills are carried forward, and to serve as a permanent monument to the truth that competence is not inherited and dignity is not owed only to those born to it. She looked at Callum, Colonel Reed, Sergeant Barrow, Whitfield. If you will accept the honor, I would like you to lead it, all three of you, together. Reed did not speak for a moment, then he nodded. Once, firm, yes, ma'am, on behalf of all three of us, we accept. The chamber was silent. A small contingent near the back began to applaud. The sound was thin at first, uncertain. Then it grew, more stood, then more. Not a majority, not yet, but enough to matter, enough to suggest that the tide, once it turned, might not turn back. The days that followed were difficult, the kind of difficult that came not from crisis, but from the harder work of reconstruction. Investigations were open, evidence was processed, witnesses were interviewed. The full scope of Kaylor's network was larger than even Seraphine had estimated. He had not simply built a circle of allies. He had constructed an entire parallel governance structure that operated in the spaces between the official institutions. Dismantling it was like removing a parasite that had grown into the host organism. Pull too fast, and you damage what you were trying to save. Pull too slowly, and the thing adapted and regrew. Kaylor Vex sat in the same cell where Callum had spent 3 days, in the same silence, pressed against the same walls. The irony of it was lost on no one. There were moments that almost broke her. There was a night when Callum found her in the maintenance corridors, alone, sitting on the floor beside a repaired power coupling with her ceremonial robes pulled around her on the rough stone. She was not crying. Solvarians did not cry the way humans did, but her skin patterns had gone still, frozen in place, like ice that had stopped remembering how to flow, and Callum recognized it as the Solvarian equivalent of a grief so large it had shut everything down. It was the face of someone who had won the battle and was only now in the quiet after understanding what it had cost. He sat down beside her on the stone floor. He said nothing. I had learned that silence offered without expectation was sometimes the most generous thing you could give another person. After a long time, she said Riven would not recognize this court. And Callum said, would he recognize you? She was quiet. The machinery hummed around them, systems that worked, that someone had cared enough to repair, that would keep running because maintenance was not glamorous, but it was necessary. I think he would, she said finally. I think he would be frightened for me, and proud. She stood. The patterns on her skin began to move again, slowly at first. Then, with increasing fluidity, she walked back toward the light of the upper levels without looking back. But she walked differently, straighter, as though something that had been leaning had found its center again. Reed took to running the institute like he had run his unit at New Meridian, with standards, with affection buried under gruffness, with an unshakable belief that competence was the only currency that mattered. Jonas was in charge of practical training. He had a gift for teaching that no one had seen before. He could take a scared young Solvarian who had been told her whole life that she was born to menial labor, and in 2 weeks have her confidently rewiring a substation while cracking jokes he had translated into Solvarian and made her laugh. Callum did the actual engineering. He also did the listening. He held office hours where anyone from any caste could come and simply talk to him about a problem they were trying to solve. Nobles came, servants came, old engineers came, sat across from him, confessed that they had been filing false reports for years because they were afraid of Kaylor and had not known what to do. Callum listened to each one. He did not condemn. He did not judge. He simply said, "What can we fix now?" That was the beginning. That was the whole shape of the new institution. Not vengeance, not purity, just what can we fix now. Seraphine came to the garden on the 7th night after the trial. Callum was already there, sitting on the bench where they had sat together in the moonlight, listening to the garden play its quiet ancient music. The crystalline plants had grown since the trial. New formations had emerged, translucent spirals that caught the moonlight and cast it in patterns he had not seen before. The garden was alive in a way that human gardens were not. It did not simply grow, it responded. It changed with the seasons and the moons, and Callum sometimes thought with the emotional weather of the beings who walked through it. Tonight it sounded different, softer, less mournful, as though it had been listening to the events of the past week and had decided that something in the air had changed. She sat beside him, closer than protocol allowed, closer than tradition permitted, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, separated by an inch of air that felt more significant than the vast distances between stars. Reed and Jonas were at the far edge of the garden, not watching, not eavesdropping, just present. 2 old soldiers standing quiet vigil at the edges of a moment their friend was walking through. Reed had been at Callum's wedding 14 years ago, not as family, as Callum's commanding officer at the time. He had raised a glass and made a short speech and told Clara she was marrying a good man. Jonas had been there too. He had made a longer speech and a much worse one, and Clara had laughed until she cried. And now they were here, standing witness again. Callum could feel them behind him. Their silence was permission. Their silence was also love. He and Seraphine did not speak for a long time. The 3 moons rose one by one. The garden filled with light. The crystalline formations shifted their chord with each new illumination. They built a harmony that was complex and strange and beautiful in the way things were beautiful when you stopped trying to understand them and simply let them exist. Callum thought about something Clara had said once, on a night when the binary sunset had been particularly spectacular. Everyone on the observation deck had been watching in silence. She had leaned against him. She had said, "You know what I love about sunsets? They are proof that endings can be beautiful." He had not understood then. He was beginning to understand now. He thought about Ren. He always did in quiet moments. He was learning something new about grief. He was learning that grief did not disappear. It did not lessen. It just found its place beside everything else. Warren's laugh was still in him. Clara's smell was still in him. The taste of Clara's coffee that she had made too strong for years. The sound of Ren singing off-key in the shower. All of it was still in him. It always would be. But now there was room for other things too. Room for the sound of a queen breathing beside him. Room for the weight of Reed's hand on his shoulder. Room for Jonas cracking bad jokes to Solvarian apprentices who could not stop laughing. Room for a garden of crystalline plants under 3 moons. Room for the strange quiet miracle of still being alive. Ren would have liked the garden. She would have picked up a piece of crystal. She would have held it to the moonlight. She would have said, "Daddy, look, it's got all the colors." He would have knelt down beside her. He would have kissed the top of her head. He would have said, "That's the prettiest thing I've ever seen, kiddo." He said it now, in his head, to her, wherever she was. "That's the prettiest thing I've ever seen, kiddo." Then he opened his eyes. Seraphine was watching him, not with pity, with recognition, the way one survivor recognizes another. "You were somewhere else just now," she said, "with my daughter. Tell me about her someday." "I will, if you tell me about Riven." "I will." The garden sang softly. The 3 moons hung low. 2 people sat side by side on a bench, not touching, not needing to, both of them present, both of them here, both of them still somehow breathing. Callum listened to the garden. He thought about engines, about the moment when you turned the key and the machinery caught. The sound was not dramatic or beautiful. It was simply functional, the sound of something working the way it was supposed to work. He had spent his life listening for that sound on New Meridian, in the escape pod, in the depths of a palace that had been trying to kill the woman beside him. I was hearing it now, not in the crystals or the moonlight or the distant hum of systems he had repaired, but in the silence between 2 people who had chosen to sit together at the end of a very long day. The engine had caught. It was running. Not perfectly, not smoothly, but it was running. And for now, that was enough. It was not a fairy tale ending. It was not guaranteed happiness. It was fragile and uncertain. The reforms would take years. The wounds would take longer. But it was a beginning. And beginnings, Callum was learning, were sometimes the bravest thing a person could accept. 3 humans were teaching engineering to Solvarians who had never been allowed to learn. A queen was walking through her own palace with her hair loose and her shoulders back for the first time in 11 years. An old man named Marek Solane had lived long enough to see the truth spoken in the great hall. He had closed his eyes for the last time 2 nights after the trial, in his own bed in a room full of light, and 94,000 people who had died on a colony no one answered would be remembered because the Institute would carry their names on its founding charter, and an 8-year-old girl who had held a crystal up to the light would be one of those names. Not officially. Callum had not asked, but he had written her name into the code of the backup system. Right there in the source, Ren Whitfield, for her, because engineers left their names in the machines they built, sometimes as signatures, sometimes as prayers. He had made his signature a prayer, and every time the palace ran her name would run with it. The 3 moons reached their apex. Reed and Jonas were quiet at the edge of the garden. Seraphine's shoulder was 1 inch from Callum's. The crystals sang, the palace hummed, the engine flew, not fast, not for anywhere in particular, just steady, just onward, just the way engines were supposed to fly. Callum Whitfield closed his eyes. He listened. The machine was running. The people he loved were in one way or another still with him, and for the first time since a sky turned white above a burning colony, he thought that maybe he was not simply unfinished after all. Maybe he was still being built. Maybe they all were. Maybe that was the whole point. The moons crossed. The garden played. The story that had begun with a man in chains, counting seconds in the dark, closed on the same man sitting in the light beside the queen he had chosen to believe, with 2 brothers behind him, and the memory of a wife and daughter carried gently now, and a future he could not yet see, but was for the first time in a very long time willing to walk toward. The engine caught. It ran.